Hello everyone, welcome back to my YouTube channel. My name is Dr. Mohammed Sohail Khan. In this particular session, I will be talking about performance management system. Just to have a brief overview that where the performance management system actually lies in the whole HRM functions. So in human resource management, basically we talks about human resource management, then we move to strategic HRM, then we talked about HRM planning and job analysis. After that, we talked about recruitment. After recruitment, there's a whole phase of selection, socialization, career management, and after that, there's a whole room of performance management system. Just to have an idea about what is the importance of performance management system. So performance management system is about performance evaluation, evaluating the employees. Then there's a question of why employees should be evaluated. Definitely, if organization needs to make a profit or if the organization needs to care about their ROI, performance evaluation or performance management is the key for that. There are a couple of questions that basically resonates to performance management system. First of all, what is the purpose of evaluation? Who should evaluate? Who should be evaluated? What format should be used in terms of evaluation, and who will do the evaluation? I just want to really clarify this stage that performance evaluation and performance management are two different themes. So performance management for me is a bigger umbrella under which there's a section or there's an instance called performance evaluation. Performance management system. So if we just see the literature of performance management system, basically it boils down to three main purposes of performance management. First of all, there should be a two-way feedback in performance management system. So for example, performance measures mutually set between employer and employer. So traditionally, it was done that employee are not being told that on what measures their performance will be evaluated. The second purpose of performance evaluation, performance management system is about the development. So for example, once the evaluation phase is done, then there's a whole phase of development as well. So for example, employees are being told about their deficiencies and weaknesses, and then there's a whole area of developing those employees into those deficient areas. Then the main purpose of performance evaluation is performance management is documentation. Documentation in terms of, for example, if, for example, after 3 months, if the performance of any particular employee is not changed in some way, then there's a whole chance that that employee needs to be downsized. And in terms of that, there needs to be a whole documentation that basically told that why that employee is being downsized from the organization. So the focus of performance management system is basically on three main pillars. So for example, first, the focus is on the individual. Definitely, no one can deny this thing that performance management system is basically for the employees. So discussion of performance may be emotional and may generate conflicts between subordinate and supervisor. So performance management system should have a room where a supervisor can really talk with the employees so that it can focus on their individual development. Secondly, the focus is also on the process. And third, the training the appraisers. Appraiser basically means that the person who is responsible for evaluating others. So there is a whole link of performance management system with the Equal Employment Opportunity Act as well. So what is equal employment opportunity? Equal employment opportunity says that employers should be given an equal chance of employment despite of their religion, despite of their race, despite of their sexual orientation, and despite of their gender as well. So this is how performance management system relates to equal employment opportunity. That basically says that once if the employees are allowed for employment and their rights should be saved in terms of their equal opportunity, equal employment opportunity, and the same lens should be taken as for the performance management system as well. So in terms of evaluating performance of any employees, appraiser should not think of the gender, of the sexual orientation, or also about the religious closeness of that person as well. So this is how these things are related to each other. Equal employment opportunity requires performance management system to be objective and job related. For example, ADA Act that says that performance management must be measure reasonable success. So for example, reasonable success means that this should be a mark that everyone can get in. So for example, there should not be any discrimination in terms of their religion or their sexual orientation or their gender. Number two, valid performance appraisal are conducted at established intervals. So most of the organizations basically have their performance reviews or performance management after every 6 months to 1 year. However, it is recommended to do those things like in equal steps. So for example, if any organization wants to do a performance management system after a year, it should recommend that employees should be at least noted about their performances in the span of 3 to 6 months, so that if they have a weakness in some areas, they should take care of that weakness and they should overcome that weakness or that skill gap into this period. Evaluation done by trained appraiser. I think so. This is really important in terms of understanding the importance of performance management system. So the appraisers needs to be really trained in terms of the work that they're doing. So for example, they should know that why they are evaluating the employees, what are the marks that on which they are evaluating the employees, what are the evaluation criteria that they are being used for evaluating any employees, and that criteria needs to be very specific, very transparent, and it should be same for everyone. And number four, poorly trained supervisors may show bias. So these are the aspects in how employment, equal employment opportunity, and performance management systems are interrelated with each other. So this is a typical appraisal process. So first, organization needs to establish the performance standards with the employees. Secondly, they need to communicate the expectation and goals with the employees as well. So for example, on the very first mark, organization needs to establish the standard with the employees. Employees needs to know that what kind of expectations the organization is towards them. Number two, these expectations should be communicated to the employees, and in terms of how those expectations should be met, what are the goals and objective. Once those goals and objectives will be met, then how those goals and objectives will be linked to their performance. Number three, organization needs to measure the actual performance. Number four, compare the actual performance with the standard performance. In this phase, organization basically try to seek a gap between the standard that has been set with mutually with the employees and what is the actual performance that employee has given. So this is the fourth part, is basically the gap analysis, if there is any. Number five, discuss the appraisal with the employee. So for example, if employee is not or if employee doesn't reach to that standard, then that gap area or that the skill gap needs to be discussed with that employee as well. And in the next phase or in the last phase, a corrective action should be taken in terms of fulfilling that skill gap. Let's talk about the appraisal process in much more detail. So the first step of appraisal process is about establishing the performance standard. Now the first question that comes into mind is that from where these performance standards would be derived. First of all, if you just look at the organizations, all the functions of the organizations are basically try to align themselves with the organization mission and vision statement. So definitely those performance standards should be derived from the strategic goals. So if we just looked in terms of hierarchy, there's a mission statement of organization, there's a vision statement of organization. Those vision statement basically translated into the strategic goals. Those strategic goals basically translated into the SMART goals, and those SMART goals basically translated into the task per employee. So somehow those performance standards should be also derived from the mission statement of the organization. If we just look at in terms of clarity, basically performance standards should be aligned with organization's mission and vision statement. The second part is about the communication of those performance standards. So in that, organizations should make an effort in terms of communicating the expectations to the employees. Somehow, I think so there's a missing piece, or this is the missing piece. Somehow, organization fails to communicate the expectations to the employees, and somehow the employees are not really clear that what kind of expectations basically an organization wants from them. So this is really important in terms of performance management system. All the performance expectations needs to be clearly articulated to the employees so that they can make necessary efforts. Third point is about measuring the actual performance. So how the actual performance can be measured? If we just look at in terms of simplicity, there will be two dimensions of measurement. There would be qualitative measurement, there would be quantitative measurement. Quantitative measurement basically talks about the quantity or the number of items that an organization wants, for example, after a day, a week, or a month. However, qualitatively, measurement basically talks about how those things or how those quantities should be achieved. So the organization should take account of both quantitative measures and qualitative measures. The next phase is basically comparing the actual performance with the standard. This is also really important because employees should know that how those comparisons have been made. And employees will be clear about those comparisons once they are being told that what kind of expectations that the organization have from them. And another important phase is discussing the appraisal with the employee. If you just remember that one of the important criteria of doing performance management is giving the feedback to the employees. If we just looked at that, there is a chance that employee may not be able to deliver what was expected from them. The feedback piece is really important in that phase because feedback basically have an impact of on employee self-esteem, and once employee self-esteem has been impacted, it has an effect on employees motivation, and once employee motivation is being affected, it will affect all of the future performances. So the feedback piece is really important in terms of appraisal. Also, the feedback can be positive or negative. So for example, it is basically said that employees should be given a sandwich type of feedback. So what does a sandwich type of feedback means? So for example, in the first phase, the employees would be told about their strengths, the strengths that those employees had. Secondly, employees should be told about their weakness, not about just their weakness, how to overcome that weakness, how to remove that skill gap. And then again, employees should be told about their strength as well. So for example, strength, weakness, strength. So that kind of sandwich appraisal or sandwich kind of feedback is somehow recommended in the performance management literature. The last step is about initiate corrective action if necessary. This is also really important in terms of organize in terms of organization profit, for example, from the organization point of view or from the employee point of view. This is important in terms of employee motivation. So employee motivation would be impacted if employee has been given a chance in terms of correcting that particular skill gap or in terms of correcting that weakness. If employees have been given that opportunity to develop themselves and to work further in the organization, their motivation will definitely be impacted in a positive way. That will be translated into their future performance, and that will definitely impact organization performance as well. What are the five mistakes basically managers do in terms of performance review? The first and the foremost important is waiting for the performance appraisal to give the feedback. So for example, as we already talked about, one should not wait till the day of performance appraisal. So for example, if I am seeing any shortcomings or weakness in my employees, the first thing is to give the feedback there and then, because it will help that employees to to at least correct their action till the time of performance appraisal. Also, it will give them some kind of strengths that they are able to deliver what organization asks to them. Number two, overemphasize on recent performances. Employees are basically kind of judged in terms of the performances they have given in the recent past, and it can goes both ways. It can be positive, it can be negative. However, performance management or performance evaluation should not take account of only the recent performance. Performance management is basically the 6 months performance or year long performance, whatever the performance timeline is. So the employee should be looked at from the lens of the time period that their performance appraisal is, not just the recent past, because it can either be really positive or really negative. And both has basically different kind of drawbacks. So for example, if employees recent performance is really good, somehow their weaknesses would be hidden in that good performance, and somehow, for example, employees performance is really bad in the recent past, somehow their good work is hidden under that bad performance. So the employees should be appraised or evaluated for a certain time period. Number three, being too positive or too negative. This is also really important in terms of looking at the performance evaluation, because too positive means that you are basically trying to undermine all the bad things that that employee has done. Or too negative means basically you are undermining all the positives that this employee has. So the performance evaluation should be transparent, should be discussed with the employees in a way that is understandable to that employees as well, so that they can relate to that evaluation. Number four, being critical without being constructive. As we already talked about, that performance management is about the feedback. So if there's lots of criticism, on the employees without telling them that how they can improve their performance, it will affect their self-esteem. That will eventually affect their motivation, and at the very end, it will be translated into organizational performance. So the best thing is would be that the supervisor needs to be critical, but needs to be have some kind of development sense as well. So they needs to tell the employee that how these weakness can be overcome. Talking, not listening. So for example, once the performance chart is in the hands of the supervisor, they are basically just telling the information to the employees rather than having a chance of listening as well. So for example, employees should be given a chance in terms of defending why their performance is not up to the mark. It can be some reason that really associated with the financial of that employee. So for example, it can be a financial reason, it can be a scarcity of resources, it can be some personal problem, it can be some family problem, it can be some kind of stress that that employee is dealing with during the whole process. So employees should be given an equal chance of talking as well, so that supervisor had a more chance of listening employees' perspective. Now talk about what kind of three appraisal approaches are basically available. There can be more, but most of those approaches basically come under these three big umbrellas. So one of the appraisal approach is about absolute standard. And then performance management could be according to the relative standard. And the last is about the achieved outcome. Now we'll just look at both of those, all of those things in details. In terms of like which is good and which is bad, somehow all of those approaches have their own strengths and have their own weaknesses as well. So it is really difficult in terms of choosing that which one is good. The best way is to not using a single approach in terms of evaluating the employees rather than at least combination of two. Absolute standard. So absolute standard basically talks about measuring employees' performance according to the established standard. What is that established standard? So the established standard is basically any standard that has been established and then employees performance is being judged against them. So for example, if we just take an example, if the employees have been asked to work on 40 pieces of shirts in one day. So for example, this is a standard that employee needs to complete 40 pieces of shirt every day. And if, for example, employee A has developed 36 pieces, employee B had worked and he or she will be able to develop 38 pieces. Again, employee C has developed 32 pieces. So according to the absolute standard, all of those performances from different employees have been checked or measured against the established standard that would be 40. So employees A 36 shirts will be measured against the standard of 40. Employees B 38 will be measured against the standard of 40, and employees C 32 shirts will be measured against the standard of 40. So in absolute standard, in each employee's performance is basically measured against the established standard. The second point is evaluation is independent of any other employee. This is really important in terms of Absolute, and this is basically one of the differentiation between absolute standard and relative standard. All of the employees are basically measured or evaluated independently of each other. So for example, there is no concern that how much employee A has been developed, there's no concern that how much employee B has developed, and there's no concern that how much employee C has developed. There will be no concern and there will be no comparison between those three employees. However, those three employees will be measured against the established standard independent of each other. That is really reverse in terms of relative standard. If we just see relative standard, it means that relative to this. So for example, employee A has performed good relative to employee B. Or for example, employee A and B has performed poorly relative to employee C. So in relative standard, one of the employees or the group of employees, or there's a paired comparison that has been done in terms of relative standard. So for example, if we just look at the group order ranking, in that group ranking, employees are placed in a classification reflecting their relative performance, such as top 1/5. So for example, if someone has developed at least 80% of the standard, so for example, if the standard is 40 and at least 80%, it means that employees has been expected to make at least 32 pieces out of that 40 pieces. So it means that the top 5 employees will be placed into the category if they have produced 32 pieces. So for example, if we just looked at this standard in terms of relative group ranking, that then employees A, employees B, and employees C are basically all of them will be top-notch employees because they have at least achieved 80% of that, or they have at least achieved 80% of what was expected from them. So in the group order ranking, employees have been fitted into the classification. So for example, here in our example, 80% is the classification of that. So all of those employees basically goes under that classification. In terms of individual ranking, all the employees have been ranked from highest to lowest. So for example, in the example we said that employee B make 38 shirts, employee A make 36 shirts, and employee C make 32 shirts. So the criteria would be B, A, and C. So how the individual ranking works, the individual ranking works in terms of relative to that. So for example, relative to relative of those employees, employee B is the best employee in that case because they have produced 38 of those pieces. If we just actually look at that, that employee B is not able to achieve the mark of 40. However, if we just relatively looking at them in terms of all the employees A, B, and C, relative of A and C, employee B's performance is the best one. In terms of paired comparison, in this method, all of the employees basically compare to each other. So for example, A would be compared to B, B will be compared to C, A will be compared to C. And then there will be whole tally that how many times employees B is performed good or how many times employees A is performed good. So for example, this is a relative criteria relative to the employees or relative to the group or relative to the paired comparison. One of the important piece of appraisal method is management by objective. We'll just look into the detail that what is management by objective. Management by objective is something that organization has basically have some specific goals or objective that needs to be fulfilled, and those have been translated into specific goals, and those specific goals have been communicated to the employees, and then employees are basically trying to achieve those goals. If we just looked into the management literature, we see that there is a whole discussion of SMART goals in management literature. So what are SMART goals? SMART goals are basically some specific goals, some measurable goals, attainable goals, realistic goals, and time-bound goals. So organizations are supposed to develop some SMART goals that their employees can achieve. This is the whole philosophy that goes into management by objective. Management by objective says that it includes mutual objective setting. Mutual means it is being set by the organization and the employee. So that's why it's mutual. And it is basically evaluation based. So for example, employees have been given a task to achieve, which is mutually agreed, and also they have been told that how they will be evaluated in terms of achieving those tasks. This is what we call management by objectives. So getting their objectives or getting the goals or achieving the goals, having some predefined or mutually agreed objectives in mind. Again, as we already talked about, that performance standards are somehow aligned with organization's mission. So management by objective says that organization's missions basically translated into the vision statement, that vision statement basically translated into the strategic goals translates into the operational levels goals. Those operational levels goals are basically translated into some SMART goals, and then these SMART goals are basically translated into the task level goals. And once employees are started achieving those task level goals basically accumulated in each other, and then they become SMART goals. Those SMART goals basically become some strategic goals. Those strategic goals basically translates into the vision statement. That vision statement basically translates into the vision statement of the organization. So this is somehow the relationship of management by objective with the strategic objectives of organizations. So hopefully this session will help you in terms of understanding that what is performance evaluation, what is the difference between performance evaluation and performance management system, what are the several approaches of appraisals, and specifically how management by objective works. Thank you very much.